All right, friends, let's get to work making a bow and arrow. Okay, so first thing we'll need to do, obviously, is we'll need to create some input for our bow. So we'll go to our input, we'll go to the actions here, we'll right click, and again, we'll go to input, input actions. And of course, we'll call this IA underscore bow. Okay, and once that's made, we're going to go back to our IMC adventure. And if we look under the mappings, we will see we already have the IA move and attack. Go ahead and add a new one, and this will be our new bow. Okay, and then we can select what key we want, which I'll just use K. Okay, we can close that. All right, so now the obvious choice here for the person who's going to be using the bow is going to be our hero and BP hero. All right, and if we look in here we already have the input action for attack and movement. So let's change this to sword attack. And we'll bring in our new input action. Bow. And we will call this bow attack. Okay, so open this up. Now we are going to use the started, not triggered. Okay, just so you know, going forward. Now, if we think about this for a minute, if we go look at our sword attack just above, we have a check as to whether or not the player can even attack. And then if they can attack, it plays the animation of the sword attacking. And then it sets to is attacking to true or false. All of this will remain the same for our bow, essentially, right? If we're using our bow to attack, then we are attacking. And the only difference is the animation will change. So we can go ahead and just like copy this and come down here and paste. And then we can come off started. And then we just got to change our animation sequence to bow. Okay, we're going to take off the sword play rate here. We'll just delete that. And we'll just leave it at 1. Purposes. Okay, compile and save. Now if we go ahead and want to go hit play, if we hit K, our bow animation should be working. Okay. So with our bow animation working, we can now set up the projectile. So for that, we're going to make a brand new blueprint. So let's go to our blueprint folder, create a new folder, and we'll call this projectile. And inside of here, we'll right click and we'll make a new blueprint class, actor, BP underscore projectile. And and base, because that's the whole reason we're calling it a projectile and not just calling it arrow. Because we're going to make a base projectile, because later we are going to be using that projectile, because our boss is going to use a projectile boss battle that we're going to make later on. Okay, I will double click, open up our new projectile base. And inside of our components, thankfully, Unreal Engine is really strong with creating projectiles, because it is heavily used in first-person shooter games. So we can literally just add a component called projectile component, or projectile movement, rather. Same as like player movement or character movement, except this one's more meant for projectile. Okay, and if we select the projectile movement, if we look here in the details, we'll see at initial speed we have a max speed. Let's go ahead and set this to 1000. Okay, and then also we don't want any gravity. Okay, we just want the arrow to fly. Okay, so now if we're going to be able to have this object calculate any kind of damage, we need to add some collision. So we're going to use a sphere collider. Okay, and then we're going to use it to replace our default scene root. So to do that, we're just going to grab our sphere and drag and drop it on top of the default scene root. Okay. So now this is going to be like way too big, so we're going to go ahead and set the sphere's radius to about 10. Okay. Now, if you don't have the arrow or projectile, then you'll need to find yourself a sprite somewhere you can use. But for some of you, you might have access to mine. So I am going to create a new folder. We're going to go into paper assets, and I'm going to make a new folder and call this props. And inside of here, I'm going to drag in extra props here. All right, and then I'm going to right click, sprite actions, apply paper 2D settings. I'm also going to right click, sprite actions, and create a sprite. Okay. All right, so with the DP projectile base selected, we're going to add a sprite, paper sprite. And the sprite will be the arrow. Okay, now obviously we're going to have to put this at 270 since it's a top-down game, but because it's a projectile component, it's also going to fly in the direction of this red arrow. So we're going to have to rotate this 270 degrees as well. We're going to want to change to our translucent, unlit, bright material, and go down to the collision of the sprite, and we are going to do no collision. And then we want our arrow to be on top of everything in our game, so we're going to go here and search for sort priority, and we're going to set that to 1. That will make sure that this sprite remains above all the other sprites as it's fired. And then the other thing we want to do is set a lifespan for this. So make sure you got your projectile base selected. We're going to search for lifespan, and we'll set this to like just 5 seconds. Otherwise, as we fire arrows, our scene would infinitely just continue to fill up with all the arrows that we have fired. That would not be good. and compile and save all of that. All right, so now we're going to go back to our projectiles folder. And we're going to right click, create a child blueprint of our base that we will now call BP arrow. We can open this up. Okay, and then with this, what we're going to do is I'm going to grab the right, and I'm just going to pop it back a little bit, kind of putting that collider at the tip of the arrow. Okay, so let's go back to our BP hero now. And what we're going to do here is we could use the sprite and create like a sprite socket to hook the to spawn the arrows from as the player shoots and stuff. But then we've got 8 points of view or positions for our player. We'd have to do that socket creation for every single of the 8 points of view. And we don't want to do that. Now we could use our sword collider box. We already set up to face in any direction, right? So we could use that as the source for spawning our arrow. But I think what would be better here is if we just come into our BP hero and let's add a scene component. One second. Right. So we want to select our capsule component, the main capsule here, and we're going to add a scene component. Okay. Now by adding this scene component, it gives us like a completely separate gizmo that we can position. And I believe it's going to be around 30 on the X position for the right placement of the arrow for the bow of our character's animation. Okay, now it can be hard to see this in here, so just to show you guys, we could add a billboard as well to the scene component, and that would make things visible for us. This little dragon head would show us where our arrow is going to fire from. Now I'm just going to reset the location of the dragon so that it lines up with our arrow scene component. Okay. Why don't we name this scene component arrow POS for position? Okay. All right, so now when do we fire the arrow? Well, just like when we did with the sword for when we calculate the damage, we're going to have to go into our hero's animation to add a point. So hero, and we're going to go into the AS animation source for hero, and we're going to select our bow. So we see here, when I stop play, if you look right when we get to frame 1 is when the bow now begins to appear empty. Okay, so we're going to right click, add a notify, a new notify. We're going to call this just spawn projectile. Okay, and then we can just drag and drop it over back to the first frame here. Okay, so now we need to go into the ABP hero. If we look, we got a new notify for spawn projectile. Okay. But before we can do anything here, first let's go to our hero. We need to make a new function. So we're going to go to our functions of our hero, and we're going to call this function fire arrow. Don't get excited. This is just firing the arrow, not a fire arrow. Okay. And we compile and save, and now we'll go back to the ABP hero, and inside of our notify, we are just going to spawn sorry, not in here. Back to the hero. My bad. So in the fire arrow, we're going to spawn actor from class. It will be the arrow. Repeat arrow. Okay. Then we can get the arrow position, which I'm going to correct the spelling of. We'll get the arrow's current position. Okay, and we're going to get world location. Get world location. No. Let's get world transform. Get world transform. And what we're going to do is we're going to right click and split both of these and plug in the location and the rotation, and don't do anything to scale. Just leave the scale where it is. Okay. Okay. We're gonna go to BP arrow real quick. I think there's one thing. Okay. Now under collision handling override, we're going to always spawn, ignore collision. Okay. We go back to the ABP hero, and in here we can get the owning hero. And now we can call for fire arrow function that we just made and plug that into here. Now if we go play test, when I hit the K button, the arrow will fire. Okay. So moving on, let's do the fun stuff, right? So let's enable that projectile collision. So let's go to our base projectile. And we click on sphere collider, or sphere collision. All right, here we are down here. And right here where it says the preset is overlap all dynamic, we're going to switch this to hit detection and use our custom preset. Okay, and then we're going to scroll down to on component begin overlap and just click on that. Okay. And now, just for this, for the test of it, we're going to do a print string here. Try this again. Print string. Okay. And an off other actor, that's what we want to print. All right. So if we go and play now, what we'll notice here is that not only is the arrow registering the turkey hit, but it's registering hitting myself as well. In fact, it hits me twice. Right? So that can't be good. So let's go ahead and fix that. So we need to prevent self-collisions. Let's go to the hero, DP hero. Okay, and inside of our fire arrow, we need to set an owner. So if I expand this, you'll see here we get a set owner. Okay, so let's just set the owner to self. We'll get a reference to self and compile and save. Let's go back to our projectile base. And then off of other actor, we can get owner. And then we can say not equal. Sorry, I got this all backwards. The other actor will be not equal to the owner actor. There we go. Okay. And then we'll set up a branch. Arya, no. Come. All right. So now if we compile and run it, we will no longer be detecting ourselves. Oops. It would help if I were to look that back up. Anyways, you can see that now true doesn't trigger when I hit nothing. It only triggers a true when it hits the turkey. So we're no longer a valid target. Okay. Now we need to apply damage, which means print strings don't hurt too much. Now we're going to go from true and apply damage. Target will be the other actor. We'll just set the base damage of arrows to 1. In fact, let's just promote it to a variable. We'll call it projectile damage. Projectile damage. File save. And if we check, it should be set to 1. There we go. All right, and now the damage causer will be self. Actually, so self would make it the arrow, and then that would mess up our knockback, and our knockback would be based on where the arrow hit. So instead, let's just get a reference to our owner again. This will make it the player's position. Will calculate the knockback for us. All right, so if we go test this now, should be able to actually hurt the turkey. Okay, now the turkey can be damaged. All right, so after the apply damage, whatever damage is applied, let's just destroy the actor. So if we go test again, now the arrow shouldn't fly all the way through the turkey, it should just disappear. Which means now I don't insta-kill him either. There we go. Okay. Now there's a small bug we need to fix here where enemies aimed by arrows might stop despawning. So let's go to our adventurer base. And it'll have something to do with the cast here. So this handle hit extended coming after this causes some weird glitches. So what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect this, move this over, and place it before our cast. That should handle any glitches we may encounter. Okay. Wasn't really an issue for me so far, so there's not really a new result to show you. Everything's copacetic here, but just in case. Okay. But now let's make it so that our arrows will despawn when they hit a wall. So you'll need to set up some walls for yourself. I don't have any walls set up, and that's okay for my purposes. But you guys will have collisions set up on your map. Okay, so then you'll want to make sure that you set tile thickness to something around like 500. In fact, why don't I go ahead then? I do have some collision here. Well, my collision's not really enabled, but in any case, let's go to the paper assets environment, the tile map itself, and we're going to search for the collision thickness and set it from 50 to like 500 or something, just to make sure your collision is plenty big enough to stop any objects. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We're gonna probably want to do this too. So where we got the generate. No. Maybe I should just. Okay. I'm gonna go to the tile set here. Sorry, not the tile set. Oh yeah, I want the tile set. Collision data. We got collision here, setup, preset, block all. Good. Enable generate overlaps event is enabled. We're going to want to generate potentially overlap events during level streaming as well, just to be safe. Okay, and then we go to our projectile base. And grab the sphere collider where it says hit detection. And we're going to switch this to custom. So when we switch to custom, everything we currently had available will remain the same. But we'll switch from the... We'll leave it all the same except for world static. We'll generate overlap event as well so that we can destroy our arrow with that event. And just keep hit detection to overlap. And now if you've got walls set up, your arrow should disappear when it hits walls. And of course, it won't destroy your walls because your walls, well, they don't have any health or damage. Can't take damage. All right. Let's go to hero real quick. And there should be a variable called sword damage. And just to play with the balancing of our game, we're going to make melee hits worth twice as much as arrow hits. The sword damage will take 2 damage away, and arrow hits will only take 1. All right. So with that should be everything. Apparently my collision works now. And look at that. My arrows disappear when I hit collision. Look at that. And then if I hit turkey, they get knocked back. And if I sword attack them, despawn. Perfect result. All right, everybody. So thanks so much. Stick around. We got more great stuff coming up, including drops and pickups.